What's up, everybody? I am your host, a naked American man who steals balloons from kids, and that is my co-host, my undead friend who is currently stuck in limbo because he was torn apart by a werewolf. And welcome to the Grindhouse Syndicate, where today we are heading across the pond to talk about one of, if not the best, werewolf film ever made. John Landis's American Werewolf in London from 1981, which was requested by Florence Niven from Bradwell, Staffordshire, which I believe's in the UK. Sorry if it is not. And Angie Wright. So thank you guys for requesting this one. I actually love this movie for many different reasons, but I've always dreaded the research and the writing that would come along with such a massive horror film like this one. So I greatly appreciate you guys making me do it. It was one hell of a challenge, but I'm glad we are finally talking about it. And I think we have a really good episode for you guys this week. Now, this is technically the end of Listener Appreciation Month, where you guys pick the movies that we covered all month long. We do it because we really appreciate your support all year, and we figured, why not let you guys come up with the schedule for a month? And I gotta say, you guys always do a really good job. We always end up discovering new films that we've never seen or sometimes even heard of, or we end up diving into movies that we may not have ever covered on the show. So it is as enjoyable for us as hopefully it is for you guys. So thank you again. I have been wondering all week your opinion on this movie because I know how you feel about comedy in horror films.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I've seen this, and I remember it for the comedy aspect, which I'm not a big fan of, and the amazing practical effects,
Of
which
course.
I am a huge fan of. It is also obviously a werewolf film, which is not my favorite subgenre of movies. I will say out of all the classic universal monsters, werewolves are probably some of my favorite. I like them better than some of the other subgenres, but,
Better than vampires?
yeah, not
Okay.
a big vampire fan, unless it's done right. There is some vampire movies that are done good, but I have a newfound appreciation for this,
Oh, good.
especially after doing a deep dive. I never disliked this movie. It was never a movie that I didn't like. I think comedy and horror is one of those things where it has to be done just right, and you have to find a really, really fine balance, and I think that's very difficult for a lot of filmmakers to do, but I do think John Landis did a really good job at balancing that out.
Agreed. This movie, I can't remember if we ever talked about it or not, so you may know, but this movie actually slightly inspired something really important with this show. We will talk about it when we get to that part, but yeah, it's interesting. I did something years ago that I took a little bit of something from this movie for this show in general.
Mhm.
So with that being said, are you ready to dive into American Werewolf in London? Because this one's going to be a bit of a longer episode.
I have a feeling I think I know what you're talking about that inspired something for the show. I do believe that I'm keen in on that. I don't
Okay.
know if we ever talked about it though,
Okay.
but yeah, we'll get there when we get there. But yeah, I'm ready to dive in.
All right, let's do it.
Hello, boys and ghouls. If you want to stay up to date on what's going on with the show, talk about or submit your movie requests, or just say die, then I got good news for you. You can always find us at one of our social media accounts or our official website at grindhousehorrorpod.com, Facecrook at the Grindhouse Syndicate Horror Podcast, Instascam at grindhousesyndicate.horror.pod, and many gore. which you can always find links for in the show notes, as always. And you know what I always say, the morgue, the merrier. So please subscribe or follow for alerts on new episodes. Now, back to the show, kiddies. Frights, camera, action.
And if you really love us and don't want us to show up to your small pub and make you miss the dartboard for the first time ever, give us a review. That guy was pissed.
He was very, very upset.
Yeah. So, An American Werewolf in London is a 1981 supernatural comedy horror film written and directed by John Landis. It stars David Naughton, Jenny Agutter, and Griffin Dunne. The film's plot follows two American backpackers, David Kessler and Jack Goodman, who were attacked by a werewolf while traveling in England, causing David to become a werewolf under the next full moon. It was produced by Polygram Pictures, Lycanthrope Films, and George Folsey Jr. It was released on August 21st of 1981, had a budget of $5.8 million and a box office of $62 million. So, back in 1969, John Landis was working as a production assistant on the film Kelly's Heroes in Yugoslavia. And one day, he took a little day trip with the film's cinematographer who had kind of become his mentor, and they ended up coming across a very weird sight, which was a group of gypsies performing a funeral out by a road. Now, there were a few things that made this funeral very odd to the two men. One, they were burying this man at a crossroads. Two, they were putting him in the ground feet first. And three, they had wrapped him up with a blanket and strands of garlic. And the reason why they did all this is because the man had committed some very bad crimes, and they feared that he might rise from the grave and become a zombie. Now, Landis thought this was crazy. The way he saw it was while the rest of the world was figuring out space travel and medical science, these gypsies were trying to stop a bad man from coming back from the dead and killing more people. This, mixed with Landis's feeling of being an outsider in a strange country, gave him an idea to write a screenplay. And after settling on werewolves, he got to work. So we then fast forward over 10 years later, where Landis is directing his first movie called Schlock, where he also stars in as this, hard to describe, like Planet of the Apes looking creature.
He's a schlock.
I guess, whatever that is. And this is where he meets special effects artist Rick Baker. And while Baker does Landis's makeup every day, he begins to tell him about his next movie, which he wants Baker to work on, which is American Werewolf in London. And despite the story not really being fleshed out yet, Baker gets excited and he immediately agrees. The only problem is, American Werewolf in London wasn't his next movie. Despite shopping it around, nobody wanted this thing. And according to Landis himself, the biggest problem that studios had with the screenplay was the mix between comedy and horror. Pretty much every executive said it either had to be a horror film or a comedy. No in between. But Landis refused to change it, and he stuck to his guns while continuing to look for other projects in the meantime. So after a few years, Landis ends up becoming a box office goldmine, directing hit after hit like the Kentucky Fried Movie, Animal House, and the massive hit The Blues Brothers. And this finally gives him enough pull in Hollywood to make his werewolf movie that he wrote when he was just 19 years old.
It's kind of wild to me that the whole gypsy story, he started thinking, well, but what if this did happen?
Yeah.
Like, how unprepared would we be?
Yeah.
And how horrifying that would be.
I gotta admit, it's a good idea for a story.
And then when he started thinking about, the base of the story, he wanted to do kind of the universal monster, what subgenre he was going to land on, he went with werewolves. And hearing him talk about it was the first time that I learned that there was actual people that were put to death for being a werewolf.
Yeah.
I had no fucking idea. Like, I
Yeah.
knew about witch trials and all that, but I had no idea that they actually put people to death for accusing them of being werewolves.
Yeah. Crazy. Crazy world we live
Like,
in.
did you know that?
I had heard some stories about it. I had never really deep dived into it, but I just kind of chalked it up with, how we thought people were witches too for no reason except for an accusation. And it was very believable. I listen to a lot of history podcasts throughout the day, and there's not a lot that is shocking to me anymore. The
Yeah.
stuff that we've done in the past.
Yeah, I know, but, like, and the witch thing is one of those, it's really hard to disprove. So, the other side to that is it doesn't take much to prove an accusation. So they were able to put these girls and some guys to death for accusing them of witchcraft when nobody was around. But a werewolf, like, where in the fuck would you get evidence that you would even think of blaming somebody for being a werewolf?
His
Like, I
his
heard
hair's
this
falling out. He's shedding. He must be a werewolf.
I heard dogs howling in his house at night,
Yeah.
and the crops are not growing. Let's kill them.
Yeah, in my opinion, I think a lot of those things, because I've heard of people being put to death for being vampires, and I think a lot of it was an excuse to take out somebody you didn't like or a competition, and I think that's not true for all of it, but I think it was really easy to, if somebody pissed you off in your village, just to accuse them of something that was not really provable and would get everybody riled up, and you kinda take care of that right then and there.
Well, I know with the witch trials, it was a lot of, like, when times were rough, when crops were doing bad, or,
Gotta blame somebody.
people were struggling, all these people had inner guilt for bad things that they had done, and it was easy for them to write it off on somebody else, and it made them kinda ease their own guilt.
Yeah.
The bad things that they did that nobody knew about, and saying, "Hey, the crops aren't having a hard time because I secretly slept with somebody outside of my marriage. It's this lady.
Yeah.
That's what it is. It's not me, it's her."
Yeah, I think a lot of it was not really seeing anything to give you an idea this person's a witch or a werewolf or vampire. It was always just
Inner guilt.
some kind of human emotion issue. So he ends up going to Polygram Pictures and securing $10 million for the project. But he soon runs into a huge problem. Rick Baker, the only man he trusts to pull this off, has already agreed to do the effects for another werewolf film called The Howling, which sends Landis through the roof. Now, if you remember, Baker got really excited about doing the movie when Landis originally told him about it, mainly because Landis told him, unlike any of the other werewolf films, he wanted to actually show how brutal this transformation was. And over like this 8-year period, Baker came up with all these ideas that he planned to use for this film. And Baker kind of thought about it for a bit, and he calls up Landis and he agrees to do it, telling him he will figure out how to get out of doing the howling. And what he does end up doing is he sends his assistant, like his protege, 21-year-old Rob Bottin, to work on the howling so he can go do Landis's film. And if you don't know, this kind of worked out because Rob Bottin ended up being an amazing special effects guy in his own right. And just a year later, when he was 22, he ended up doing the effects for John Carpenter's The Thing, which is not only one of my personal favorite films, but also one of the most amazing displays of practical effects in film history.
Yeah, and because of that, I very much want to do The Howling. We gotta do a deep dive on The Howling just to compare the two.
Yeah,
gotta
no,
s-
that's
we-
not a bad idea.
We gotta see where the two land, because those two in, like, werewolf movies, those 2 are, like, the upper echelon,
Yeah.
and considering the whole way that Rick Baker got out of doing the howling and sending somebody who ended up, you know, but some people would say surpassing him, doing the thing that is known for all the groundbreaking special effects that are in that movie, I feel like we have to cover The Howling.
There are also 2 very different werewolves. The Howling stands on 2 legs, and this movie, it's a 4-legged werewolf,
And
so they're very different.
that's what Rick Baker initially
Yeah.
wanted. So The Howling seemed to give him a lot more freedom, but he still went and did this movie. I guess because he believed in John Landis and they had had this plan for so long. So yeah, it'll be a very interesting deep dive and kinda slash comparison to this movie.
So Landis gets financing, Rick Baker's on board, they're off to the races. And because at the time the UK was giving huge tax breaks to films, if most of the cast and crew was local, Landis hires a London film crew and heads overseas. Fun little fact, the first thing Landis ever films with this English crew is the porno scene, which of course made everybody feel really uncomfortable day one. Uh,
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people who watch this movie don't know that that entire, like, cinema porno that's playing in the background was actually shot
yeah.
for this movie.
So, filming took place between February and March of 1981, mostly on location with some interior shots taking place at Twickenham Studios. The moors were mostly filmed in the Black Mountains located in Wales. The village of East Proctor was really the village of Crickendarn. The hospital was Putney General Hospital. The subway station was South Kensington Underground Station. And Piccadilly Circus was mostly filmed in the real Piccadilly Circus, which we actually talked about a little bit in our 28 Days Later episode. Apparently, that is a very difficult place to film. I think it's because it's kind of like their Times Square. So, a quick note about casting. So, David Naughton, who plays the main character David in the film, he didn't really have a real deal acting career before this. Landis knew him from a string of these popular Dr. Pepper commercials where he would sing and dance. And for some reason, Landis thought he was just fantastic. So he sends him the screenplay and he calls him up and without any audition or anything, offers him the job. Naughton thought that this was a joke at first, but after talking to Landis for a bit, he realizes this is the real deal and he immediately accepts the job. Also, Ginny Augater, who plays Nurse Alex Price, met Landis and his wife years before when she briefly moved to LA to pursue a film career and pretty quickly became really good friends with his wife. So he already knew that she was capable of pulling this off and he offered her the job without ever auditioning anybody else for the role. So once the film was shot and post-production was completed, the film was sent off to the ratings board. And what's funny here is the UK had an issue with the gore, not the nudity, and the US had an issue with the nudity and not the gore. So Landis did trim some of the gore up, but not by much, mostly resorting to just like shortening quick shots of blood and like body parts. I'm not sure which rating board it was, but he had them watch the film, give their notes, and all the shit they wanted changed. He then tells them to give him 10 days to fix it, and then he invites them back. And they watch the same exact film, and they gave it the green light. He never changed a single thing. He just showed them the exact thing they watched 10 days prior, and they were like, yep, looks good.
Yeah, that's John Landis, I guess, man. They say he's a salesman.
He's very much a salesman. He's very good at convincing people, which is really, I don't know how many other filmmakers would have been able to pull off the stuff he pulled off in this without his ability to convince people.
Yeah, he's definitely, when it comes to convincing people and getting people to put together, like, impossible circumstances and making them happen, Like, man, when we go into detail about the stuff and everything that had to come together with the whole Piccadilly Circus part, like, it is mind-blowing how many things had to go right and perfect, and he is very much like a, "Yes, we can make that happen,"
Yep, we can do it.
and convinces people that they can do it.
Yeah, he actually ends up having the London Police Department call wherever they filmed the Blues Brothers, that police department. He was like, "Talk to them, they've worked with me before."
Yeah.
Yeah. So, An American Werewolf in London released August 21st of 1981 and grossed 30 million at the box office in the US and Canada. It unfortunately didn't make as much as they thought it would because The Howling came out a few months before in March, followed by Wolfen in July. So, a bunch of werewolf films back to back that year. It did perform really well in the UK for obvious reasons and ended up raking in $62 million worldwide, which is definitely not bad.
It's weird how we see that in cinema. I think there's a name for it, but it's a thing throughout cinema history of these movies with very similar plots will all hit at one time.
Yes.
And
Most of the time, it's because it gets kind of leaked and the other studios. I know that was like Armageddon and Deep Impact that happened.
yeah, yeah, and I know a lot of it has to do with, sometimes what's going on in the world
Yeah.
around with, like, a lot of the Rosemary's Baby type
Yeah.
movies. We just seen it a couple years ago with the resurgence of the Rosemary Baby type, the
Evil,
the
evil kid, Antichrist kid.
Antichrist kids being born whenever the whole abortion thing was a big deal in politics, but when it comes to something like werewolves, it almost has to be like a leak through
Yeah.
studios.
That's true because
It's
unless
not
there's a bunch of wolf attacks.
yeah, there's not a lot that can be going on in the news or politics that has to do with where, like, I could see next year there being a bunch of alien movies that start being made
They're,
with
yeah.
everything that's going on
Well,
now.
yeah, there's
But
about to be one that comes out, the Steven Spielberg one, and
yeah,
I'm pretty sure we'll see a trend follow.
yeah,
Now, despite its popularity now, it wasn't critically loved when it first came out. Massive horror movie fan Robert Ebert reviewed the film unfavorably, giving it 2 out of 4 stars and writing, quote, "An American Werewolf in London seems curiously unfinished, as if director John Landis spent all his energy on spectacular set pieces and then didn't want to bother with things like transitions, character development, or the ending."
damn.
Yeah. Despite these shaky reviews and werewolf fatigue from fans of the genre, the film did win a Saturn Award for Best Horror Film of that year, and at the 54th Academy Awards, motherfucking Rick Baker won Best Makeup in a Feature Film, which was the first time a horror special effects person won an Academy Award for their work on a horror movie. Fuck yeah, Rick. You 1000% deserve it.
Well, I wonder if The Howling was up in that same, who what they were voting for.
Good question. I don't know.
That would be very interesting to see if he was nominated with his protege on a different movie,
Yeah.
and one of them, had to take home the award.
Yep. So when it comes to home video release, there's a lot of things floating around. So I am just going to hit the kind of bigger ones. So the film was first released in 1981 on VHS and Betamax under MCA Video Cassette Incorporated, which would be the last time Universal would release the movie on home video for 17 years. That's okay though, because Vestron Video acquired the video rights from Universal and re-released it on VHS in 1985. The film was first released on DVD in December of 1997 by Live Entertainment, where it was presented in a widescreen transfer and contained the film's theatrical teaser trailer. I've personally never understood why they used to include the trailer on DVDs. Why the fuck would I want to watch a trailer if I have the whole movie?
Yeah.
Why do
I
they
don't
put
get
that on there? Like, I don't care about that. I don't know. Somebody tell me if you know the answer of why they put the trailers on there.
Yeah, maybe just preserving the history.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, they always put them on the Blu-rays and the 4Ks, and
Yeah, and did anybody ever
I
watch
never
them?
watch them
Nope.
ever.
No.
No, I won't say I've never watched them because I do remember watching, like, the original Friday the 13th. Like, I do remember going through and one of my releases, my DVD releases had the old original trailers, and I went in and watched them just just to get an idea what it was like for
Yeah, that I
people
can
before that
understand.
came out, so that's really the only thing I could think of is for the historical preservation for people 30 or 40 years down the road to go back and watch that. And in VHS time, they had no idea that there was gonna be these discs that
Yeah.
completely made their tapes obsolete.
So Universal did eventually get the video rights back and release a 20th Anniversaries Collector's Edition DVD on September 18th of 2001, which included an audio commentary with actors David Naughton and Griffin Dunne, interviews with John Landis and Rick Baker in a 1981 promotional featurette. A high-definition Blu-ray 2-disc standard edition release of the film titled An American Werewolf in London Full Moon Edition was released by Universal on September 15th of 2009. In 2016, Universal re-released the film on Blu-ray as a restored edition to celebrate the 35th anniversary of the film's release. And finally, on October 29th, 2019, Arrow Video released a 4K restoration as part of a Blu-ray box set that contains all previously released extra material, the documentary Mark of the Beast, The Legacy of the Universal Werewolf, the 2009 making-of documentary Beware of the Moon, filmmaker John Spira's video essay I Think He's a Jew, The Werewolf's Secret, a new interview with Landis, lobby cards, and a booklet, which is the version that we used for this episode. Some other really awesome resources I used for this episode that I highly recommend you check out is the YouTube channel Movie Junkies, who did a video called An American Werewolf in London Making Monsters. Also, secrets behind the iconic transformation from the Universal Pictures at Home YouTube page, and Sean Clark's Hollowed Grounds channel, An American Werewolf in London filming locations. All fantastic videos that show you a ton of cool stuff and talk about way more details than we can give you in this episode. And by the way, if you check any of that stuff out, tag us in like a comment or something, tell them we sent you there. It kind of helps spread the word about the show. But all really good resources. And I will tell you, we can only give you so much in like a 2-hour span. There's going to be stuff we're going to have to leave out, but if you really love this movie and you like this episode, there's so much more to go out there and learn.
Yeah, there's a lot of fucking
Yeah.
history on this movie.
Yeah, I literally spent a whole entire 7 days researching and writing this episode.
Yeah, I know that they have, outside of the making of, they have a feature-length documentary on the 2016 re-release Steelbook Best Buy that I have, that I watched the movie on, and then you have Arrow, which went and did their whole thing, and there's just so much information and panels, and just this movie has been talked about so many different times.
Yeah, the Sean Clark Hollowed Grounds video that I just talked about actually brings the guy that did the Arrow documentary into that video. All right, so ratings. Rotten Tom, 89%. IMDb, 7.5 out of 10. Letterboxd, a 3.8 out of 5, which, by the way, I forgot to tell you, we just started a Letterboxd account for the show.
Nice.
So, in the Google average audience rating is a 4.6 out of 5. If you would like to watch this movie, you can currently find it streaming for free on Tubi, Plex, Filio, and for rent on all your standard, YouTube, Amazon, Fandango at home. I forgot to type it into the notes here, but I know it was for rent there. All right, you ready to dive into the plot?
I am ready.
I figured, you would rather get behind the scenes info and special effects stuff than where you could rent the fucking movie.
Yeah. I mean, this is a classic that I would highly, highly suggest buying on physical
Oh,
media. Just
100%. I
if
have
you
2
are
copies myself.
Yeah, if you're a fan of the movie, just the 2 copies that we mentioned that we went off and did this episode based off of, there is so much cool behind the scenes shit you get to see.
Yep. All right, so we start out by meeting our 2 main characters, David Kessler and Jack Goodman, 2 American graduate students from New York City who are on a backpacking trip across the UK. And after a long ride in the back of a truck full of sheep, a kind stranger drops them off in a place called the North York Moors, where they begin walking in the direction of a town called East Proctor. And right as the man goes to drive away, he gives the 2 tourists some important advice. Keep off the moors and stick to the roads. So after the truck drives away, the 2 men start walking, and this is where we learn some important information. One, David and Jack have been lifelong good friends, going to school together since at least the 8th grade. 2, the trip is expected to last at least 3 months, with the men starting off here in the UK and continuing throughout the rest of Europe as the time goes on. And finally, 3, the trip seems to be David's idea, because as the conversation kicks off, we learn that Jack is not having the greatest time so far, and he puts the blame on David, especially considering the area is much colder and wetter than Jack thought it would be. I guess he also didn't expect to be riding in the back of a truck full of sheep, which ended up shitting on his backpack.
Yeah, it's interesting. Out of all the background information, I only think I heard one mention of this, with the sheep being a metaphor for them riding in the back of the sheep
Oh,
to be
good
slaughtered.
call. Good catch. Yeah, one thing I do want to point out is there's an event that is about to happen here soon that is going to split David and Jack up, kind of. So we don't get a whole lot of Jack and David throughout the movie. But I gotta say, despite this, these 2 have amazing chemistry in their scenes together.
Dude,
And
that is my first note
yeah,
on this movie was, holy shit, I love how genuine their conversation is. They have great chemistry.
yeah, they had never met each other before meeting here in London to film. And when they met each other, they actually both found out they grew up in like small towns in Connecticut, I believe. And then they also had the added fact that they were like the only 2 Americans besides John Landis here in this whole area. So they said they pretty quickly became real friends in real life. So
Yeah, you can tell. You can tell just based off of their conversation. It feels very genuine.
yes. So as these 2 are walking, we see that it is beginning to get dark, prompting them to cut through a big ass field down into a very small town in order to seek some food and shelter. And this is where they discover a tiny little pub called the Slaughtered Lamb, which has a fucking badass sign and name. Now, as they get ready to go inside this place, we immediately see Jack is a little concerned. But after a bit of teasing, David manages to convince him, as we then see the 2 Americans walk into the establishment where everyone quickly pauses to stare at them, which definitely makes the 2 men feel uncomfortable, especially Jack. And what's interesting about this scene in particular is Deborah Landis, the costume designer, purposely picked these bright puffy North Face coats for Jack and David because she wanted them to stick out from the locals in this bar. And the way she describes it is she almost wanted them to have this like spaceman look in order to show that they are from a completely different place than everybody in the bar. And the only way to get these jackets was for her to fly all the way back to the US and buy them in the North Face store. And as of today, apparently only one of the jackets still exists.
That's interesting. John Landis talking about the gypsies, and while we're out like trying to figure out how to get to space, these people are living in a completely different time. And that was a really interesting way to, and I don't know if his initial thoughts went into that thought process, but to make these 2 stand out as they completely come from a different place and a different time.
It could have,
Uh,
because Deborah is his wife, the
yeah.
costume designer, so they could have easily talked about this
It
before.
it also very much shows, they're the 2 Americans in this town. One thing I remember specifically about this movie that I didn't like was how gloomy London in general feels, and how gloomy the UK side of it is, and then rewatching it, I really see how cinematography-wise and costume-wise, they used that gloomy backdrop to enhance the blood and the gore, and it pops so well with the rest of the dolled down cinematography,
Yeah,
and the jackets are a great example of
yeah,
that.
yeah, good point. So I'm pretty sure that every person that lives in or around this town is currently hanging out in this pub, which is made even worse by the fact that it is very tiny. And I got a couple of interesting facts about this place. So, first off, this was originally a biker bar that was recommended to Landis by somebody working on the production, and he immediately loved it, but he thought it was too big. So, this leads to my second fact. This place is actually about 3 times bigger than what we see here. The area where the barmaid is standing is actually just the side of the real bar. If you actually look behind her, you can see just how far the far back the bar goes. And the wall with the star on it is a fake wall put up by the production. That area, it actually extends about another 15 or 20 feet. And if you were to remove that wall and the other wall and look to your right, you would see a much bigger restaurant slash bar. The place is still open to this day, and it looks way different than it does here. It's like much more fancy, resembling closer to like a restaurant than a pub. And also, the outside and inside are two completely different places. The outside is actually someone's home.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if it's still around like, in modern day, they should definitely try to incorporate that sign that was up in some way, but I assume they don't, if it's, like, a more high-end restaurant,
Well,
and considering this sign has probably been long gone for a long time.
they do kind of lean into the history of the place with the film. At one point in time, they used to have the dartboard up in there, but it is a very fancy looking place, and when you see it, you realize they really only used a small corner of this place for the movie. So, needless to say, the locals are not happy to see these two outsiders arrive, but after a few seconds or so, everybody kind of goes back to what they're doing, where we then see David and Jack order some hot tea. And this is where Jack notices the 5-pointed star crudely drawn on the wall to their left. He, of course, points this out to his friend, but just like we saw earlier, David blows this off, making a joke about it, downplaying the whole thing, and not really considering Jack's paranoia. So Jack then notices there are 2 candles mounted next to the star, where he then leans in real close, telling David it's called a pentaangle, a 5-pointed star used in witchcraft, which is also the mark of the Wolfman. Jack then tries to convince David to ask the group about the symbol, and when he finally does, it causes a whole place to freeze, staring at the 2 men like they just crossed a line and have unstayed their welcome. David and Jack pretty quickly get the picture, abandoning their tea, grabbing their bags, and quickly leaving despite the barmaiden trying to convince them to stay. But one of the patrons then interrupts her, telling the 2 men to just go, God be with them. And right as they are walking towards the door, another man speaks up and gives them some advice. Stay on the road, stay clear of the moors, and beware of the moon, which sounds a little familiar. So right as David and Jack quickly take off down the road into the dark night, they suddenly hear the ramblings of an incoming thunderstorm, which means they are about to be stuck walking in the middle of nowhere at night while it's cold, and they're soon to be very wet. So this is not a good trip so far. We then cut back to the pub where the barmaid looks at the room full of men with disappointment and disbelief for the fact that they are just going to let these 2 young innocent men walk right into possible death without as much as a warning of what's to come. But we do get a very brief explanation why they are doing this. Because according to one of the men, they fear that if they were to tell the two Americans the truth, then the whole world might find out their dirty little secret. And here's the thing about that. Nobody would ever believe them.
Yeah.
Look at what's happening right now, like the UFO stuff. Like, the government kind of releasing all these videos, being like, we don't know what the fuck this is, and people still don't believe it.
Yeah.
Not everybody, but there's a big chunk of people who no one would believe if they told these two Americans and then these Americans went and told somebody else. No one would fucking believe this.
Especially in America. Like, nobody would care about this little town.
No.
They would, I mean, that wouldn't even, no news place would even cover that.
Yeah, you don't have to keep it that big of a secret. No one is going to believe or care.
I do find it hilarious how the guy who speaks up about it being murder is the same dartboard guy who got mad at them and ran them out initially.
Yeah, and he ends up being the same guy later on who feels bad.
Yeah.
So we then catch up with David and Jack, where we see them calmly walking down the road as the clouds then begin to clear, revealing a very bright, very full moon. And this is where they make a massive mistake. Despite multiple warnings, they step off the road as soon as it begins raining, once again trying to cut across the moors. Back at the pub, we see the patrons still going back and forth over letting the two men leave, with one even backing up his position, claiming that even if they would have warned the Americans, they would have just considered them all crazy. But this is quickly put to rest when they all suddenly hear a howling in the distance, making them all reflect on what is about to happen and briefly considering going after them and bringing them back to the pub. So after that, we then cut back over to David and Jack, who also hear the howling, which causes them to freeze in their tracks when suddenly the rain just stops. And it is at this point where they realize they have fucked up, because Jack notices it's a full moon and David realizes they didn't stick to the road, which causes the two men to immediately turn around and run in the direction back to the pub. And after a few minutes of this, they come to the conclusion that they are lost. But as soon as they stop to figure out which direction they need to go, they start to hear the sounds of a beast's heavy breathing nearby. That breathing quickly turns to growling when Jack then spots it starting to circle them like prey. They then turn in the other direction and just try to ignore the creature, but it becomes apparent almost immediately that this is a bad plan when they then spot the dog-like beast now in front of them. This prompts them to take off running in a different direction when suddenly David trips in a hole and falls. The two men then start laughing at the absurdity of how scared they just got when out of nowhere, Jack gets attacked by the creature, which we see has long, scruffy, dark gray hair, a very large mouth, and big white teeth. Jack is slammed to the ground as the creature jumps on top of him and begins biting and tearing at his neck and face, shredding his flesh as he screams for David to help him. And what does David do here? Well, he jumps up and he takes off running in the other direction, leaving his friend to die.
Yeah, he got the fuck up out of there. I mean, he said, fuck saving my friend.
Yeah.
For one, these two guys are the last two guys in the world that should be backpacking out in the dark. They managed to accidentally come off of the road. It's like the one thing, direction-wise, that they were given, hey, make sure you stay on the road.
Multiple times.
They accidentally realized that they have walked off of the road and then get lost and going in one direction.
Yeah.
You would think they were zigzagging or something. They're going like one direction and they get lost. And then, yes, David is like, friendship or living. I'm going to pick living here. It's funny how he takes off and then realizes, like, I don't know, probably 30 yards away. Oh, fuck, I should probably go back and save my friend.
Yeah. So Jack screams for help, fill the cold air reaching David's ears in an instant, causing him to finally turn around to help his friend. But unfortunately, when he turns, he finds Jack already bloody, torn to shreds, and lifeless. But David doesn't get much time to mourn his friend when he is suddenly attacked by the creature, quickly thrown to the ground, receiving multiple wounds on his chest, neck, and face. But right before the animal gets a chance to rip out his throat, multiple gunshots ring out, hitting the beast in the chest and killing it instantly, where it is then revealed that the townspeople from the pub finally worked up the nerve to grab their guns and go after the men, saving David's life. David then lays there in total disbelief at what just happened, when he then slowly turns his head to get a look at what just attacked him, and all he sees is a dead, bloody, naked man that doesn't look anything like the creature he just saw kill Jack. Despite the fact that this makes no sense, David looks up where he notices he's now surrounded by the people from the pub, as he then quickly blacks out from his injuries. And in case you did not read the title of the movie, Jack and David were just attacked by a werewolf, which is where our story really begins. So, I got a fun Grindhouse Syndicate fact here. This scene directly inspired the very beginning of our theme song, which you all hear at the start of each episode. If you pay close attention, it always starts out with the sound of thunder followed by a werewolf howl.
Yeah, that's where I thought you were going with that. I
Yep.
don't know if we ever specifically talked about this movie, but I have always noticed after the first season, the werewolf howl that was added in there. So I assumed when you said that it was probably from this one.
Yep, it is. When I did all the sound effects for the intro music, I kind of picked out some things that I thought represented not just like broad horror movies, but kind of specific stuff here or there. So, a few days later, we catch up with David, who is now recovering from his wounds in a hospital in London. And as he wakes up for the first time since the attack, he yells out Jack, where he is then greeted by an absolute goddess in the form of a nurse named Alex Price. I know I talked about how attractive she was in Child's Play 2, but goddamn, Jenny Agutter is gorgeous in this movie. She's like 40% of why I like the movie so much.
She is very, very, very attractive, but also plays this character extremely well. And this is where I disagree with Robert Ebert's, character building. She very much so takes on that character of she is attracted to taking care of people. She has that type of personality.
Yeah.
And everybody knows people like that in real life. I mean, she's not only a nurse, for God's sakes, but she is attracted to a guy that she can take care of, that she can be there for. And that is a very realistic personality trait that is not just written in there because it benefits the story, but it is very realistic. And I very much disagree with Robert Ebert there when he
Wouldn't
says
be
that.
the first time.
And
It won't be the last.
yeah, well, normally, like, he just hates horror movies because it's a horror movie, but that's an actual complaint about the movie, and I feel like it's completely unwarranted. She plays this character so amazing. It makes me wonder if she is like this in real life. She does such a good job.
Well, she actually didn't, she almost didn't take the role because she doesn't like being in horror movies. And she says that it's not because she doesn't like horror movies. She just has a hard time knowing what to bring to a character in a horror movie. But she ended up taking it because she was such good friends with the Landises. And I gotta say, man, like, I wish she was in more horror movies because not only is she extremely attractive, but she does really good in this movie. The thing with her character is she ignores a ton of red flags, but so do people in real life.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, there is a lot of females who do get in relationships because there's somebody who has issues and they feel like they need to take care of them. And there is a very subtle hint at her personality trait that I'll mention whenever we get into her house. But yes, I think that the way she plays this character, like her and David's chemistry and David and Jack's chemistry take this movie to a whole nother level.
Yeah, a lot of good chemistry between actors in this whole movie. So anyway, Nurse Alex looks at his chart and notices that he is from New York, which instantly strikes her as interesting when David's doctor suddenly walks in and informs her that Jack is the one who died in the altercation. And according to the police report, the two men were attacked by an escaped lunatic, which Dr. Hirsch finds a bit odd. So we then see a man named Mr. Collins who works for the U.S. Embassy arrive, where he then tells David about Jack's death. And needless to say, David doesn't take it well, forcing Nurse Price to shoot him up with a sedative. And right as the medication is starting to take effect, Mr. Collins informs him that the London police are preparing to interview him about the attack. Fun fact, Mr. Collins is played by Frank Oz, who is mostly known for the voice of Yoda. Yep. So
Interesting.
it's at this point where we meet Scotland Yard Inspector Villers and his bumbling assistant, Sergeant McManus, who are investigating the attack that killed Jack. But David quickly shoots down the report about an escaped crazy person jumping them, admittingly telling them that it was some kind of wolf. Now, even though McManus kind of believes him, Villers thinks this is dumb, considering it would take the whole town lying and keeping this a secret to falsify the report. Not to mention, the autopsy report of the attacker shows that not only was he shot, but he was also a man. The inspector just chalks David's false memory of the event up to shock, informing him that the case is now officially closed, as they quickly say goodbye, leaving David stunned. Also, before we get too far into this, it is at this point where we keep seeing David have these weird dreams of himself running naked through the woods, attacking and eating animals, which he totally doesn't understand. So, as we are about to see, Nurse Alex has taken quite a liking to David, where we see them both doing some serious flirting, or even at one point she starts to feed him his lunch. Fucking lucky bastard. We then cut to a scene where David once again questions Dr. Hirsch about the attack, asking him if he saw Jack's body all torn apart for himself and if he bothered to talk to the police that brought him in. Hirsch blows this off, explaining that no, he hasn't seen the body, but you wouldn't be surprised at what a crazy man could physically do to another human being, and he should just get some rest because he is going to be released soon. After Hirsch leaves the room, he sends Alex in to keep David company, bringing the two even closer together. So basically, what is happening here is David is trying to convince his doctor that the escaped crazy guy story is bullshit, and he needs to look into it for himself. That way he could back up David's story. But Hirsch doesn't really care about what David thinks really happened because he just assumes that his memory is scrambled from this traumatic event and he just needs to rest so he can get better before he gets released. One thing I really like about this character is he does a good job at listening to David's obsessive ramblings about this wolf attack thing, and he doesn't look at David like he's crazy. He's kind of having a complete different attitude towards all this than Inspector Villers, who totally treats David like he has no fucking clue what he's talking about. I think Hirsch does a good job at being an anchor for the movie.
Yeah, it's very, very different than the inspector. The inspector very much seems like he doesn't really give a fuck. Like when detectives are overworked and they just want to write like a suicide off as a suicide when it's obviously not.
Yeah,
It's
they're just like,
obviously,
I'm not
foul
going
play.
through. Yeah, I'm not going through all this to prove this story. We'll just stamp it solved.
Yeah, and the doctor also knows that, his wounds and stuff has been dressed, although he apparently hadn't, been seen by any medical doctors or anybody prior to showing up at the hospital. So he already kind of knows that there's
Something not adding up.
yeah, there's inconsistencies in the story.
Yeah. I think he does a good job at grounding, because you have David who full on saying this crazy thing. You got the police that are like, no, it's really much simpler. And then you got the doctor in the middle that realizes that some parts of David's story do make sense, but he's also, needs to be rational.
Yeah, I think he understands that also with the trauma that's going on, that there's going to be some psychological effects,
Yeah,
whereas these police are not doctors. They don't
it's
understand
black
that.
and white for them. Yeah.
Yeah.
So after that, we then see David fall asleep while Alex reads to him when suddenly we see him back at home in New York watching TV with his family, which consists of his parents and two younger siblings. And at first, everything seems totally normal when out of nowhere, there is a knock on the door. David's father then gets up to see who it is, but as soon as he opens the door, he spots four demonic looking werewolf Nazis who blast him away with machine gun fire. And it's at this point where all hell breaks loose. After his father is killed, the werewolf Nazis breach the house from all different directions, bursting through the windows and kicking in other doors. David immediately jumps up but is quickly grabbed from behind, having a knife put to his throat while being forced to watch his family be brutally murdered by these scary ass looking creatures. By the way, that was a real knife. Why they didn't use a fake one, I don't know. So, this demon Nazi werewolf is placing this knife to his throat while holding him by the hair when his mother, who is doing the dishes, also gets blasted away by gunfire, getting sent flying through the kitchen at the speed of light. It kind of reminded me of the blow up doll at the end of Nightmare on Elm Street that gets pulled through the window.
Yeah, the awful doll.
Yeah. After she dies, the werewolves just start letting their machine guns rip, destroying everything in this house while three other ones start setting the living room on fire. And once they have killed everyone and obliterated the whole place, the werewolf Nazi then slices open David's throat, leaving him to die. But that is definitely not the end of David's story because it is immediately revealed that this was just a crazy ass dream. The first time I saw this, which I don't remember like when, I think I was like 16 or 17, I was so confused by this scene. I thought I had missed some important information because it's such a batshit crazy scene out of left field. And I was like, how did we go from werewolves to Nazi demons with machine guns?
Yeah, this is one that always stuck out in my memory of this movie and it being kind of a horror comedy and that shit not making any sense. And they're not even werewolves. One of them is kind of a werewolf, and we've found out in the special features from Rick Baker why that was. But these are more so demons, Nazi demons, and this shit always just stood out and made no sense to me. But after doing a deep dive and rewatching it and hearing John Landis talk about, what would be a young Jewish man's like
Nightmare.
worst nightmare and fear, especially growing up in the 80s with family members who had grandparents that went through the Holocaust. And this would be a very terrifying thing that Nazi demons would come in and kill your family. And it was at that point where I was like, okay, that actually makes a lot more sense. And then, you know, the scene itself is just really cool.
Yeah, it's
Like,
great.
it is really cool.
Yeah, and I think it's in this episode or the after show stuff that I do have a little bit more information on this scene. But an interesting thing about this scene too is Rick Baker didn't officially have an effects team when he did this movie. What he actually did was he brought on fans of his to help him do the effects for this movie, which of course consisted of mostly like amateur special effects hobbyists. Baker even said like one or two of them had just wrote him letters about how big of fans they were of his work, and he said, "Awesome, come help me with this movie if you can," which is
Dude,
fucking wild.
that is insane.
Yeah. So he brings these people on, and one of the first tasks he gives them is to make these demon Nazi masks. And they were very basic, just pullover masks. They had no moving parts, just essentially Halloween masks, which is the reason why the camera doesn't do like close ups or linger on them for too long.
Well, Rick Baker talks about how he was going to do more with these other than them just being basic masks. They were only done with step 1 of a 2-part process, but John Landis was like, "No, I already know how I'm gonna shoot the scene. They're fine. Let's just keep them how they are." And he shot the scene where it, wasn't a big deal.
Yeah, and it works.
Yeah.
I don't think they need to really be any more than what they are.
Yeah,
They're actually terrifying,
I always
honestly.
thought the scene was really, really cool, but I disliked it from a storytelling standpoint, and then hearing, why the scene is in here, and it makes a lot more sense. I really like this scene now.
Yeah. So we then see David wake up in the hospital where he is greeted with breakfast, but right as he goes to start eating, he gets a visitor, Jack, who, despite being in good spirits, is still completely torn to shreds with 2 giant gashes across his face and his neck completely ripped open. This is, by far, some of the best fucking makeup I have ever seen. The neck wound is an 11 out of 10.
Yeah.
It looks amazing.
Yeah, I think Rick Baker even talks about, like, the piece of the neck that
The
goes
skin
back
flap,
and forth was an accident.
yeah, it came unglued.
But it's just one of those things that works, and it just works to the favor of the movie. But, man, it is incredible, the prosthetics and then them going in and adding veins and the jugular, and every part of this looks amazing. I think to the point where the actor that played Jack was very upset about
Yeah,
this makeup.
yeah. We'll go over the makeup here in a moment, but he did get depressed when he did this first stage of makeup.
Yeah, it was very much like this was gonna be his big break, and nobody's gonna wanna look at him, which is the opposite because it's
You're-
all I looked at.
Yeah. So yeah, Jack is totally dead, but he is here visiting his friend because he has some very important information to tell him. And needless to say, David is not happy to see him. And after a bit of catching up, like old friends do, mostly about Jack's funeral, he tells him that night at the moors, they were attacked by an honest-to-God lycanthrope, aka a werewolf. And because Jack died an unnatural death, he is forced to wander the earth in limbo until the werewolf's curse is lifted. And the only way for it to be lifted is for the werewolf's bloodline to be severed. But there's only one problem. David is the new werewolf, which means he needs to kill himself or be killed in order for his friend Jack to move on. And the news stuns David. He starts freaking out, at first thinking that this is just another crazy ass dream, then moves on to thinking he's just losing his mind, quickly hitting the button for the nurse's station. This reaction doesn't stop Jack though, as he gets serious and tells David that if he doesn't kill himself, he will end up killing others. David then begins to cry as Jack pleads with him to just do it and get it over with, before more innocent people join him in limbo, and right before the nurse runs into the room, Jack looks at his friend and tells him to beware of the moon. So, this is called the Jack Stage 1 makeup. It's pretty simple when it comes to how it was done. Nowhere near as intricate as we will get later on with Jack, but basically it is about 4 or 5 prosthetics placed on the face and neck, blended into his real skin, and then added using a bunch of like latex and fake blood and glue for the kind of chunks of skin and stuff hanging off. Actor Griffin Dunne had to be in the makeup chair at 5 a.m. each morning for about 4 to 5 hours worth of work, and initially got depressed about it. We talked a little bit about that a minute ago, but another thing that, the thing that initially upset him is he said he was staring in the mirror and seeing what it would look like if he was dead.
Yeah.
And it really bothered him, and even Rick Baker went and told Landis, like, I think you need to talk to him because there's something going on here.
Yeah, if it was that serious where Rick Baker had to go to John Landis and say, "Hey, you need to have a conversation with him," like, he was obviously pretty fucking down in the dumps about it.
Yeah. Another little bit of fun info here is the original version Baker made had Jack also covered in dirt and grime, like he had crawled out of his grave. But Landis changed it and told Barker that he wanted Jack nice and clean besides the bloody wounds, which I think was a really good idea because it makes the makeup and prosthetics stand out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very good contrast.
Yeah. So we then cut to Alex rushing over to see what's wrong, and of course, no bloody Jack to be found when suddenly David kisses her and tells her that he is a werewolf, and she doesn't really take this seriously at all. Looking at him with concern, asking him if he's okay, and informing him that he is going to be released tomorrow. After briefly talking about this and the fact that David's dead friend Jack just visited him from the afterlife, Alex decides to invite the crazy American man to stay at her flat. And it was at this point where I realized that despite how deeply in love with Alex I am, she's fucking lost her mind. So she's inviting this dude who she doesn't really know at all, who is also having these extremely vivid PTSD episodes daily, to stay at her house just so she can basically get the D. That's
Yeah.
what she wants.
And that goes back to her character having that I need to take care of somebody complex. And there's a very interesting scene whenever she takes him to her apartment for the first time. I think it's the bathroom door has a hole punched in it.
Oh,
And
well, I did not catch this.
yeah, I don't know if this was done on purpose, probably not, but it points to her because she obviously didn't punch this hole in the bathroom door. Her prior boyfriends, which she touches on very briefly,
Yeah.
her prior boyfriends being the type of people who
Abusive.
have problems
Mhm.
in a lot of in real life, a lot of these girls who have this personality that get with people who have problems that they feel like they can fix, whether that's addiction problems or mental problems, or a lot of times abusive to women who have this personality type. And I thought the hole punched in her door, if this was a built set, it was
It
put
was.
there for a reason, and it points towards her personality type, and I thought that was fucking genius if it was done on purpose.
Yeah, so the apartment is a real place. You can see it on the Hollow Grounds video, and they nobody actually lived in the apartment when they did the Hollow Grounds tour. They did stick the camera in the window so you could see it, and they matched this apartment extremely accurately, but they did not film the interior scenes at this place. They just filmed where he breaks in through the window and all that, but they matched it. And the reason they matched it is because in the transformation scene they needed a false floor, but
Yeah,
they
yeah,
built
that's
this
right.
set. So the hole that you were talking about has to be on purpose.
Yeah, yeah, I forgot about the transformation scene. The indoor parts of this are is on a built set.
Yeah.
Yeah, so somebody in the art department made that choice to put that there, and it really reflects on her type of character in real life.
Good catch. So after that, he, of course, accepts her offer. He'd be an idiot not to, knowing damn well he is about to hook up with this super hot single nurse as soon as they walk in the door. And that is exactly what happens in the next scene. There is a scene right before this, too, where they go to the store and everything's ringing up like 85 cents, 90 cents, $1.13. And she mentions how outrageous the prices are. And at this rate, there's no way her pay will keep up with inflation. And I thought, you have no fucking idea, lady.
And what's crazy is he from America is talking about how expensive it is and how much cheaper things in America obviously are for him to make that comment. So just think about how bad things have gotten here
Yeah.
compared to this time.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting to see that that was something that people were talking about then. That is still not solved and still a fucking huge problem. So yeah, they end up fucking all night, where we then cut to David getting up to pee when he is suddenly shocked to see Jack standing behind him smiling. And Jack looks a whole lot worse now because even though he's definitely dead, his body has continued to decompose. And when we see him this time, his skin has started to rot and turn green. Jack looks more like a zombie now than a man, with half his face fucked up and his neck ripped out. And I gotta say, fantastic makeup job once again. This is called the Jack Stage 2 makeup, which actually tripled the amount of facial applications that they used in Stage 1. Griffin Dunne now had to be in the makeup chair at 4 a.m. instead of 5 and was now looking at 6 to 7 hours of work before filming even started. And the reason that so much had to be added is because Baker wanted the main features to have a sunken in look, much like real corpses. And in order to achieve that, he had to build up the face in certain areas, not to mention Griffin's whole entire neck, face, and hands had to be covered in prosthetics, paint, and latex rotting skin instead of Stage 1's just like half the face and the neck. So yeah, a lot more work goes into this one, and it really shows because, man, he looks fucking awesome.
Yeah, friend or not, I would be horrified.
Yeah, he's scary.
I would be like, "Man, I know we're friends, but you gotta stay, like, at least 10 foot away." Like,
I
I
wonder if he
can't
could
look at that shit up close.
I wonder if he could smell him.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
hope not,
Yeah.
considering it's like his soul almost in limbo. He's not physically there. I hope that the smell doesn't transfer over.
So next we see Jack and David head into the living room to have a chat, where Jack once again tries to convince his friend to end it all before tomorrow night's full moon, where he will unwillingly change into a werewolf and most certainly kill some innocent people. And we find out here that David has started to kinda believe him. Like, he's still in denial, but it's obvious that deep down, like, he knows that this is probably true. He just refuses to fully believe Jack because if he does, he then has to admit that he's got to die very soon, which he obviously doesn't want to do. One thing I do find interesting about these David and dead Jack scenes, David from the beginning doesn't want to talk to or see his friend Jack, even before Jack tells him the part about, killing himself. And it's obvious to me that because he feels so much guilt and he knows it's pretty much his fault that Jack is dead, because we see in the beginning that Jack wasn't super excited to go backpacking,
Yeah,
at least through the UK, specifically the moors. He also didn't want to go into the slaughtered lamb, and it was David's idea to leave the pub when they did. So in reality, multiple choices David made ultimately got Jack killed. And now he's stuck looking at him rotting and dead. And Jack keeps telling him that he hates being stuck in this limbo, and it's left David with massive guilt.
yeah. Yeah, he's definitely got some guilt, and I agree with you. I think he knows deep down that
His
what
fault.
Jack is saying is true.
Yeah. And if you remember too, like as they are about to go into the slaughtered lamb, Jack says, anything that happens in here is your fault. And David laughs and agrees. And here we are.
Yeah.
So anyway, the conversation wakes up Alex, who goes out into the living room to see what's going on, where she finds a sulking David sitting by himself. And he tells her that he just saw Jack again, and he told him that he's going to turn into a werewolf tomorrow night. Alex, of course, doesn't believe this to be true and instead thinks that he's just suffering from extreme guilt and sadness from the loss of his friend. But during this conversation, we can tell this is starting to really weigh on David as he increasingly starts to worry about tomorrow night's full moon. One really weird thing that has never really made any sense about all this to me is like the werewolf attack seems like it was maybe a week or two ago.
Well,
How is there already a full moon?
I was gonna bring that up. So I think the moon cycles are what, 2 weeks in between a full moon?
Well, full moon, you get one full moon every 29.5 days.
Okay, so he was in the hospital for almost a month. So
Yeah, but
he was pretty fucked up. Like, they don't go in details, but I would imagine that he was obviously unconscious for a couple days out of this, maybe from blood loss. He may have been a lot more fucked up than what they lead on in the movie, but I think part of it, and a big part of why it takes so long to get him cleared is the police investigation, which is why the doctor is like, "Hey, let's just keep it together until at least the police are happy with what happened, so just keep it together for now, at least until they're done with this." But also his possible psychiatric evaluation,
Yeah,
because for him to be in the hospital for a month, there was a reason that they were holding him there that they don't address in the movie.
yeah, I mean, that's the only answer. To already wind back to a full moon, and I do know too, is like, you also have because we see that he has back-to-back nights where he turns into a werewolf coming up. Even though there is only one night that there's a full moon, there is a night too that's where it's like 99%. But I do know a lot of werewolf lore is it's 2 nights in a row. Specifically, I remember that from being the werewolf in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, it was always 2 nights. So I think it's like the full moon and then the night after the full moon. But I also love how he's like freaking out talking about turning into this werewolf and his dead friend visiting him, and he's like very obviously upset. And Alex is like, "I find you so fucking hot right now. Like, I'm gonna fuck the sadness out of you."
That's her
It's
that's her
that's
personality.
her go-to every time he's freaking out. Is like, "Well, let's just fuck. I find
And
you very cute and sad."
and that works, and it
Kicks the can down the road, but it does work.
clearly that's with her personality, that's what she has found works on David and probably a lot of sad guys that she slept with, all 7 of
All
them,
7, yeah.
and, yeah, if it gets the job done, it gets the job done.
Yeah, so
I'm feeling a little sad.
yeah, me too. So after David is released from the hospital, Dr. Hirsch decides that his former patient made some pretty good points, and he decides to look into the attack himself, where we then cut to him driving him to North Proctor to the slaughtered lamb in order to ask the residents what exactly happened. And needless to say, nobody in the slaughtered lamb is super excited to see him or talk about the attack. He then tells them that he's the doctor who took care of the one American that survived, and when the man came in, he was raving about werewolves and monsters, which of course they play it off like they have no fucking clue what he's talking about. One of the younger men then gets pretty uncomfortable and suddenly rushes out of the bar, which is soon followed by Dr. Hirsch basically being told to leave. But when he does, he spots the younger man standing outside waiting on him, which prompts him to walk over and get the scoop on what is really going on here. When the very scared man then informs him that David is, indeed, now a werewolf, and during the next full moon, he will change and kill others. But this conversation is quickly interrupted by the older gentleman who ran Hirsch out of the bar, as we then see the doctor standing in the rain, totally confused by these people's reactions and beliefs. So we then cut back to London, where we see Alex head into work, leaving David in her flat to hang out, where he pretty quickly gets bored. And after a bit of watching some TV and exploring the apartment and playing around in the mirror, he decides to sit in a chair and read a book. We then get this quick scene where Alex is tending to this kind of asshole kid in the hospital, and she asks him when he keeps yelling no at her if he has ever been severely beaten in the face or neck, which I found pretty funny. So after that, we see it is now nighttime and the moon is out in full effect when suddenly, while sitting on the couch reading a book, David yells while grabbing his head, suffering from extreme pain. He instantly begins profusely sweating while announcing he is suddenly burning up, forcing him to rip his shirt off and remove his pants. Once he is totally naked, he begins to feel something weird in his hand, and once he holds it up to look at it, he is shocked to see it stretch and grow hair before his very eyes, which looks awesome.
Did right before this, the TV's playing, and there is like a ESPN fucking 14. I know they didn't have a bunch of ESPNs back then, but whatever the fuck would show a dart competition, the dart player, I think, is the dart player, the guy that was like really good in the pub. No, I'm serious.
Maybe. I
You
have
remember
no
the
idea.
shot goes to him hitting a bullseye dead
Yeah.
on when they go in the pub.
I do.
That guy is very serious about his dart playing. He gets mad and says he's never missed the board. And then right before he turns into a werewolf, there is a professional dart competition playing on the TV, and the guy throwing the dart looks like the guy from the pub.
That's a good point.
I think
I've
he's
never
a professional fucking dart player, and that's why he gets so mad, and it causes David to die. The whole movie's based around his professional dartism.
Well, here's the question. I know we have UK listeners. Is darts really that serious over there? Like, is
Yeah.
darts like
Yeah,
y'all's baseball?
to get
Like
a
our baseball?
dart competition over here has gotta be like a ESPN3 thing.
Yeah, I don't know, man. So, at this point, the pain in his body is so intense he collapses to the floor, where he is quickly now covered in body hair, as we then see his feet begin to stretch and grow, much like his hands did a moment ago. And the pain from this transformation is so intense, David begs for somebody to help him. But as we are about to see, help never arrives, and David continues to transform into a bloodthirsty beast. After his hands and feet change, he then collapses even more as we begin to hear the sounds of his bones crack and pop, suddenly revealing large vertebrae and shoulder blades appearing under his skin as more and more hair appears all over his body. The pain then becomes so great, David can no longer hold himself up, completely collapsing to the floor and rolling over on his back. And when he does this, we start to see the drastic change in his face as he now sports canine-like features along with large sharp teeth. His body is now stretched out, long and slender, with a skinny waist, a large rib cage, and huge claws protruding from his fingers and toes. David looks down at himself in utter shock, but the transformation continues, rolling back over on his stomach in a pose resembling more of a dog than a man. David then yells out again as we hear his voice suddenly get deeper, when we then get to the most shocking transformation of all. The camera then cuts to the side of his face where we can see his skin begin to move and stretch outwards. His eyes turn a bright yellow, his teeth suddenly grow double the size, and his ears morph into a point. And once this happens, we see David no longer looks like anything close to a man, but more like a very large dog. So, it is time to talk about the amazing special effects here. The main reason why this stuff was even possible was because when Rick Baker agreed to take the job, he told Landis he needed at least 6 months with the main 2 actors to prepare, which Landis agreed. So they brought in David Naughton and Griffin Dunne and immediately started working on the effect stuff, doing a ton of molds, which is why this stuff looks so good. So, for this particular scene, let's start with the hand. So they cast Naughton's hand out of a latex rubber mixture, making an extremely accurate replica. They then placed 3 syringes inside of it facing one way and 3 more facing the other way. So they're essentially facing each other, connected in the middle. That way, when they pushed air through the bottom 3 with a hand pump, it would cause the top 3's plungers to extrude upwards, forcing the latex hand to stretch up, which is exactly what they did with the feet as well. Fun fact about the feet, too. While filming, they ended up pushing the latex too far, which caused one of the feet to actually begin to rip, and it had to be quickly repaired. But yeah, this was the hand stuff was essentially done with air pumps and plungers. So the back shot was accomplished by building an animatronic which had moving vertebrae and shoulder blades that was controlled by an operating board off to the side, which needed up to 6 to 10 crew members at a time. They also, one by one, each added strands of hair, and then they connected them all together on the back. And then they filmed as Baker slowly pulled them out from underneath, and then later in editing, they reversed the footage and made it look like the hair was rapidly growing.
Yeah.
So very slick move. So when it comes to the whole body shot, as David is laying on his back transforming, What they did was build the legs, waist, and chest and then placed it on a raised floor, which had a little cubby underneath so Naughton could lay there with his neck, head, and arms sticking out, like decked out in makeup. So the actor kind of played the upper half of the werewolf, and then two other special effects guys were also under the floor and they were operating the legs. And finally, we arrive at the head. So they started off by casting Naughton's head for 3 different stages of the transformation, and then they built an animatronic head with the brow, nose, and mouth pushed outwards for the face stretching scene. The rubber used for the face was a new material called urethane, and this urethane came as a 3-part solution. You had the urethane itself, the catalyst, and a plasticizer to make it a little stretchy if you wanted. Well, Baker thought, hey, why don't we just add a bunch of plasticizer to the mix and make it really stretchy? Which totally worked. The only problem was the plasticizer didn't have a time limit where it eventually hardened, and it would actually eat the urethane if you added too much. And what ended up happening is it turned the whole entire face into liquid goo, which is why when you see the prop now, it has no face on it. The face melted off right after they finished filming the scene. Also, that full body shot we get at the very end of the transformation, that wasn't originally supposed to be in the scene. Landis didn't want to show the werewolf until the end, but he ended up changing his mind at the last minute, and the effects team just like whipped this thing up, which is why it's not shown for very long, and the shot is like really close up. They actually ended up saving this whole entire transformation scene because they shot the movie in order, except for this, and they saved this for the very end of filming, almost post-production, mostly because it was going to be so difficult to shoot, and Baker also needed to have extra time to work on this stuff. The whole thing took them a week, filming only 2 scenes a day, which was, of course, because of the makeup and prop setup, but I think it was totally worth it. Amazing effects by Baker and his team. It still holds up to this day, even on 4K, and I don't personally think, at least when it comes to werewolf transformations, this will ever be topped.
Yeah, couple things to add. So they did completely do it in post-production, and I thought that was genius. And I think that was John Landis knowing that him asking Rick Baker to do this in broad daylight, like right under fluorescent lighting, was extremely difficult. There was no hiding anything with shadows. It made everything so much harder. So to give him more time, obviously you mentioned they gave him 6 months to prepare and then did all of the shooting post-production. It was the last thing they did, and I think that was genius. So
I agree.
they didn't have like rushing around or super tight crunch schedules that was going to cause things to have to get cut. Another thing, Rick Baker, because it was shot in the light and John Landis was so particular about certain things, he actually made him go in and storyboard stuff.
Yeah, which, he hated.
John Landis hates storyboarding, but he did it for Rick Baker to have a start process of where to go from, specific points. Rick Baker also wanted to shoot a lot of this kind of from further back, and you've seen the transformation as a whole, but John Landis, and this is particularly in the storyboards, wanted particular spots and muscles to be focused on during the transformation, which Rick Baker admits was the right decision and completely enhances the shots. And then the last thing I'll add to that was they figured from the past doing, things Rick Baker did in the past, that shooting it and slowly adding the hair in between days was going to be really hard to match. So what they did is they shot the hairiest scenes first and then slowly took hair off as they did the shooting, doing the naked beginning scenes last.
Yeah. I honestly think the reason that we are probably talking about this movie still today is because of the decision that Landis made where, 1, he had to have Rick Baker, and 2, he was smart enough to know to give Baker enough time to really pull off something that was amazing and was one of a kind at the time. And I think that that is the main thing that carries this movie over the decades.
Yeah, and, to know the difficulty in shooting this in daylight, right, under a light, to know how hard that was gonna be to make it a post-production thing and give them an entire, like, 6 days to film this was extremely smart. And you gotta think Rick Baker had, like, 8 years of thinking about all these
Yeah.
different things that he wanted to do and that he could try, that he kept in the back of his mind and saved for this particular scene. So this, you know, 3, 4-minute scene that we get in this movie was the culmination of years of, you know, different things that Baker would do and say, "Hey, this would look really good," and saving that for this moment, for this movie, and it really shows on film, man. It comes out incredible.
Yeah, and because of that decision, like I said, like I watched it on 4K and the makeup is still flawless. And they had no idea if 4K was ever going to exist. And it's just a testament to how good Baker did and how smart Landis was for giving Baker the time to do it right.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely a massive shout out, the level of detail to be able to take something in 4K and it still stand the test of time. Another really good thing too, John Landis had watched the older Universal Werewolf movies, and it was always just a very quick, painless transformation, and that was one thing John Landis said he always wanted it to be. He figured it would be extremely painful for your whole body to morph and your bones to stretch, and that completely changed the werewolf genre. Like,
Yeah.
now we see in werewolf movies, I won't say it completely changed the genre. I think around this time, the entire narrative of the transformation flipped. But yes, that was a major decision that led to this amazing scene.
So, yeah, David has officially turned into a werewolf, and it is now time to take a little stroll around the London buffet. And the first victims we see is this happy couple who have just arrived at their friend's apartment building for a nice little dinner. But little do they know that they are about to become the dinner. Because as they walk around the back, they are pretty quickly attacked by the werewolf. And then their friend heads out there to look for them, and he ends up stepping on a bloody, severed hand. Fun fact, this kill was supposed to be much longer, but the actress couldn't stop shivering because of how cold it was. And finally, on like take 20, Landis just said, fuck it, let's call it a night, pack up, somebody get this bitch a coat. Also, all of these attack scenes we get where you just see the head of the wolf pop out and bite somebody, this was done with a little werewolf head that Rick Baker built, and it had a moving mouth that Baker could control with these two little handles that were located inside the head. So he would basically just stick his hands in the back of it and open and close the jaw. And he also had the ability to switch between a set of hard and soft teeth. And another little fun fact is during the attack scene in the beginning, Griffin Dunne accidentally ripped the face off of this prop, which Baker was pissed about.
Yeah, well, Baker says when he ripped the head off, it kind of pissed him off. So when they actually shoot that scene of Jack dying, he is like beating the shit out of him with this head.
Yeah, he said he
And
almost put the hard teeth in.
he made that joke like I almost put the sharp ones in, but yeah, he said he was very aggravated, and he's like, okay, if you're gonna fuck up my props, like I'm gonna beat the shit out of you with this prop head, and they said it really kind of added to the scene.
Yeah.
And people who were working on the production said that they could hear Jack screaming in the middle of the night during his death scene, and it sounded so real that it gave them chills.
Yeah. So anyway, after that, we then cut to the hospital where a now very concerned Dr. Hirsch rushes back to his office, bringing Alex in there with him, where he then urgently tells her what's going on and demands her number to try and call David. But of course, he doesn't answer because he's not there. Now, as we are about to learn, Hirsch did a little bit more investigating than what we saw earlier, telling Alex that there are now no records of the attack, the autopsy report has suddenly been lost, and the police have officially closed the case, not to mention how fucking weird everybody in that small town acted when he went up there. But despite all this, Dr. Hirsch still doesn't think David's a werewolf, but he is worried what might happen considering David thinks he's a werewolf. And now that it is a full moon and David is nowhere to be found, Hirsch decides that he needs to call the police. I feel like Hirsch goes through all this shit and he explains that David is dangerous because he thinks he's a werewolf. And Alex is like, well, I don't see any reason why I should stop fucking him. It's
Like, she's very enthusiastic about fucking me.
because she,
He seems very happy.
as we will
His
see,
tail is wagging.
like after this scene, like even though she knows all this, she still's like flirty with him and they almost fuck again. And it's like,
Well, he's
jeez.
but he is very much, if you look at it from her point of view, she's with him. And he's, like, happy, in a good mood, completely, like, normal outside of saying he's a werewolf. If you took if you cut all the "I'm a werewolf" parts out
Or
of
my
it,
dead friend is here.
yeah, if you took all that out of it, like, he is completely normal.
Yeah. So we then catch up with David in his current state, and we see, well, we don't really get to see it, but he does end up killing 3 bums who were standing by a fire barrel. When we then quickly cut to the subway tunnels where we see a wealthy businessman get chased by the bloodthirsty wolf, and at first he thinks this is just somebody fucking with him. But that is until he walks down a long, winding tunnel and spots the beast not far behind, prompting him to panic and take off running, with the wolf quickly sprinting after him. After a few minutes of this, the man starts to get winded, which leads to him tripping and falling as he attempts to climb aboard an escalator, which apparently the stuntman somehow pulled this off without getting hurt. I don't know how he did that because the edges of the escalators are sharp as fuck.
Yeah, I put in my notes that I don't think that he meant to fall. Like, that was too legitimate.
No,
I
it was
think
a stuntman.
I think he busted his ass, like, 3 steps earlier than he was supposed to fall, and he just waited out. Because if you look, he actually falls at the very bottom of the escalator, and he almost goes to get back up, and then he just lays in place. And I'm like, that shit made my knees hurt.
Yeah,
Like, my knees physically hurt when I
Landis
seen that.
Landis said that the stuntman did the fall, and it was so bad that he jumped, like he didn't even yell cut, he just jumped up and was like, "Oh my God, are you okay?" And the stuntman just turned and looked at him and was like, "Yeah, I'm fine."
Yeah, that's called playing it off. This whole shot right here leads to my favorite cinematography-wise shot of the entire movie, which is the top of the escalator
Oh, it's a
when we
good
see
one.
the werewolf come in.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Like, we just get a slight glimpse, but we get to see how fucking big
Yeah,
the werewolf is, and it is a awesome shot.
yeah, I agree. It is good. Not my favorite, but I would say my second favorite. But this guy goes down pretty hard, breaking his nose in the process, and when he turns around to look, he spots the beast slowly creeping up on him, where he eventually dies. After that, we immediately cut to the London Zoo, where we see that David is back to normal, sleeping in the wolf cage, butt-ass naked. After climbing out, he ends up stealing some balloons from a kid to cover his kibbles and bits, where he eventually is able to snag an old lady's coat and board a bus back to Alex's flat. So yeah, just in case you are listening to this with your kids in the room, if a naked American man, or any nationality for that matter, but especially a naked American man that is hiding in a bush offers to give you money to come closer, don't do it.
Offers to give you a pound at that.
Not even if
I'll
he
give
doubles
you
it.
2 pounds.
Now, if he triples it, that's different. But yeah, that's never a good sign. But Alex is stoked to finally see that he is okay. But David unfortunately can't tell her anything about the night before, which of course doesn't bother her one bit because as we know, she's hypnotized by that American dick. She just does not care about the situation at all.
Well, the nurse, the ginger redheaded nurse does peek at his dick in the
Yeah.
beginning of this movie and gets caught by the doctor, who kind of gets scolded for it. But she says he's Jewish. And clearly, I would imagine that's a circumcision
It is.
reference, but she must have told him he was quite hung.
So the actor actually had to warn Landis before about any closer nude shots because he said, I'm not circumcised. And David in the movie is Jewish. So that's why there is like a very quick glimpse of his dick when he's climbing out of the cage. But they had to make sure that it wasn't like visible that he was not circumcised. But she doesn't think it's weird at all that he blacks out for a whole entire night, wakes up in the zoo naked, and comes home wearing an old lady's coat. None of this is a bother to her. So anyway, just when it looks like they're gonna fuck again, Dr. Hirsch calls and orders her to bring David to his office immediately. And the reason why is because according to the newspaper, 6 people were gruesomely murdered and eaten last night. So her and David agree to head straight to the hospital, but despite all this, David doesn't realize that something's drastically wrong. He just keeps telling Alex about how good he physically feels and how he wants to go back to the flat after their meeting with Hirsch. They then hop into a taxi, but David's mood quickly takes a left turn when the driver brings up the murders. This prompts him to jump out of the car, looking for a cop to turn himself in, with Alex chasing behind him, begging him to calm down and come with her to the hospital. And after totally failing to get arrested for the murders, David drops a bomb on Alex, telling her he's in love with her, right before he sprints off deeper into downtown London, leaving her stunned and forced to tell Dr. Hirsch what happened. I love the scene where he's trying to get the cop to lock him up. He's like, Queen Elizabeth's a man, Prince Charles is gay, Winston Churchill's full of shit. Like anything an American could think of to piss off a Brit.
Yeah.
Surprised he's like, the Spice Girls suck, the Beatles are overrated, Brexit's good or bad, depending on where you stand.
Yeah. Yeah, this was, I thought, rather fucking hilarious. John Landis had to sit and write and think from American perspective,
Yeah.
like, to call Prince Charles a faggot.
Yeah.
When he said the Queen is a man, Prince Charles is a faggot,
Yeah.
I literally was like, okay, this is how you mix comedy in a horror movie.
If I remember right, I could be misremembering, but I believe that was a real cop that Landis convinced on the spot to do the scene. So that's
I feel
great.
like you would get in trouble in the U.S. over that.
So we then cut back to the hospital where we see Alex, Hirsch, Inspector Villers, and Sergeant McManus all discussing the situation. And immediately we find out that Villers doesn't give a fuck about Hirsch's thoughts on David's situation, mostly because he's a douchebag, and from a law enforcement perspective, there's no way David could have been involved with the murders because it is clear from the bodies that an animal killed those people. But nonetheless, Villers says that they will, without a doubt, find David to get to the bottom of this nonsense. Villers is a piece of shit, especially considering how he instantly dismisses Dr. Hirsch's, who, by the way, isn't even saying David is a werewolf. He just thinks David believes he's a werewolf. And Hirsch is looking at this from like a mental health emergency standpoint. And just like real life, the cops don't give a fuck. Their solution is just throw him in jail.
Yeah. I love how the second detective has to do his walkout speech too.
And then the doors close.
Which is pretty much the same walkout speech that the first detective does, but just a little lighter. Like he's training. Like part of his training is walkout speeches. And he's got to give his walkout speech too. It's like I'm practicing.
There's a little check on the form at the end of the day, like walkout speech. You have to grade it 1 through 10. So we then cut back to David, who makes a call to his family to say goodbye, and then he thinks about cutting his wrist right there in the phone booth. But he ends up changing his mind. And right as he steps back out into the street, he spots a very decayed Jack pointing to the entrance of a porno theater. It still blows my mind that porno theaters existed. Like, what did you do? Did you get, like, horny and then you walk home with a hard-on and jack off when you got home? Like, how
No.
does it work?
I imagine you jacked off in the theater,
That
which
seems illegal as hell.
seems like, well, I don't think legally you were supposed to, but I'm pretty sure there was a lot of what could have been babies lost in the seats of those and on the floor of those gross
Yeah.
theaters. Could you imagine having a job at one of these
No.
theaters and you have to clean?
Yeah,
Like, you're the one who cleans and, like, sanitizes the theater every night.
I'd be like,
How much cum you have to
"Let
clean?
that shit dry up."
Your job is the cum cleaner.
Yeah,
You're the vacuum cleaner.
And who wants to sit in a room with a bunch of
I
strangers?
hate that you didn't laugh at my vacuum cleaner joke.
It's just gross.
Yeah, let me go in a theater and
Vacuum
jack
cleaner.
off with, like, 5 other guys.
That's a t-shirt right there, you know, the vacuum cleaner. So fun fact about the filming location, so when Landis first scouted the location for the movie, it was called the Arrow Cartoon Theater, where they just showed, like, Looney Tunes and shit like that, but it took so long to get the movie up and going that when he returns, when he goes back, it is now the Arrow Pornography Theater, and it was too late to find a new location, and Landis was like, "Fuck it, we can make this work." And he does.
And this leads back to the very first thing that they shot for this movie being the porno that's actually like, in most movies, when there's something playing on a TV, it's
Just
something
generic,
that
yeah.
they got the license to play, but I guess they couldn't license an actual porn to play, so they had to shoot their own porn, and there's a very funny behind the scenes of John
Oh,
Landis
yeah.
talking about how this is the first film he's ever created, and then, like, the set falls down,
Yeah.
and they're, like, fucking
It's
in
like
the
an orgy
back.
back there, yeah.
Eh.
So David heads into the theater where he spots Jack in the back row. And this is perfect timing because the couple on the screen are just getting to the good part. And as David sits next to Jack, he sees that his friend is on the verge of falling apart. His skin has started to turn dark green and fall off. His lips and half of his nose are completely missing, revealing all of his teeth. His cheeks and eye sockets are extremely sunken in, and he is missing his eyebrows and eyelids, leaving him with just these huge-looking eyeballs staring at this set of big-ass titties on the screen.
That's what's and when I say, like, the great mix of horror and comedy, like, you have a very serious scene where his decomposing, like, awesome-looking decomposing friend and these other dead people that he's murdered are trying to convince him to kill himself to prevent more people from dying so they can be set free. Very, very serious moment, serious conversation, and there's a fucking girl orgasming the
Yeah.
whole entire scene in the background.
Yep. All right, so this is called the Jack Stage 3 makeup, and it is the only version of Jack not played by Griffin Dunne. So Baker wanted him to essentially look like a very decomposed corpse, but the problem was you can always build out, but you cannot take away from the face because it's the actor's real face, and he needs it. So what Baker decided to do here was make a puppet, which he started off by making a mold of the actor's head, which he then turned into a cast, allowing him to go in by hand and sculpt all the decaying features that he wanted. Once the sculpt was finished, they added the moving parts inside and then used latex for the rotting flesh on the face. There was a controller set up right behind the other side of the wall that we see directly behind Jack and David that took 3 people to operate. And because they needed the room for all the wires and stuff like that to operate the puppet, you can't like really tell, but the puppet is sitting on a platform, and the other actors, you know, like the dead people and David, they're actually standing next to this platform. Now, Griffin Dunne had no idea that he wasn't playing this part until the last minute, which he was bummed about. We know we talked about him being bummed during the stage one, but he actually got over that, and he was like really excited to do the rest of the decomposing scenes, and he was really bummed about not playing this, which
This guy's just bummed
yeah,
in general.
but
Seemed like his whole interview, he's just bummed.
but Baker did come up with the idea to let him operate the mouth of the puppet while he also said the lines. That way, it would make the puppet look more realistic, and they wouldn't have to go in and try to match up the mouth with the words later on. So David sits down next to Jack, which, despite his situation, he's still very much on David's side, and he's trying to help him. Which, by the way, I love the horrible acting and dialogue in the porno scene, especially when that guy realizes he's in the wrong room, like yelling at the wrong people, and he's just like, "Oh, sorry." I have no fucking clue why this dude doesn't have a shirt on, why he thinks that this was his girlfriend or whatever, and
Well-
what the hell is happening in this porno.
Well, that's what I mean about the like mixing comedy in, because
It's
they
great.
obviously make a play on the horrible acting
Yeah.
in porno and how the actual storylines are so
I love
fucking
it.
stupid. And he goes in, he's like, "Well, you promised me you wouldn't do this," and the guy's like, "I did no such thing."
And she's like, "I've never seen you a day before in my life." And he's like, "Oh, sorry." And he just leaves. So Jack basically tells David, "I told you so," with David admitting he's losing his mind, werewolf or not. And Jack then introduces him to some people. Well, some dead people, which are all the ones that he tore apart and ate the night before. And despite the couple being a bit cheery about being dead, it's clear the businessman Gerald Bringsley and the three bums are pissed David killed them. David then apologizes and asks Jack what he should do with him and the rest of the Chew Toy gang, telling him that he must kill himself so they can move on to the afterlife. We then get a pretty funny scene where they're all brainstorming on ways he could take himself out, with David settling on hanging, but Jack shooting this down, saying it could be too painful and he doesn't want his friend to suffer. What a good guy.
I love the subway guy. His explanation, he calls it carnivorous lunar activities. And that is the most like uptight, upstanding British businessman way of saying something.
True.
Like werewolves killing me.
Yeah. So despite how productive this conversation is going, it's pretty quickly interrupted by the full moon activating David's werewolf transformation right here in the theater, which of course leads to everybody in the room immediately getting ripped apart, which is timed perfectly with the girl on the screen's orgasm. There's just a bunch of dead bodies laying on the floor with hard dicks.
Yeah, and I will say that the girl and the pornography, I can definitely see how she got hired.
Yeah.
Uh,
She's got big old boobies.
Yeah, I was gonna say her eyes.
No,
She has
okay.
beautiful eyes.
Okay. So chaos breaks out in the building, causing all of these cops to run over, where one of them discovers the wolf and the bodies inside, slamming the large metal door out front, effectively trapping him. And this is where the shit hits the fan, because all these people run over to see what the hell's going on. The cops are trying to hold the door shut, and David is putting all of his supernatural strength into busting out. So once the police realize that they aren't going to be able to hold this door forever, they put in a call for backup, making sure to inform the dispatcher to send rifles to kill the beast. And because of the call on the radio and all these people gathered at the front of this building, Inspector Villers and McManus run over to see what the hell is going on, when suddenly David bursts out the door and immediately latches onto Villers' throat, ripping his head off and throwing it across the hood of a car or bonnet, depending on where you're from, and into the street. Once this happens, people start freaking out, where we then see David take off running through the crowd, biting and snapping at people along the way. And as the wolf runs out into the street, a double-decker bus suddenly swerves to try and avoid hitting him, which immediately causes a car wreck, where we see one passenger get thrown out of the window and run over. Cars then just start swerving and crashing all over the place, leading to a man getting hit and thrown through a glass window front, which is actually a cameo by Landis himself, who used to be a stuntman. We then see another crash where the driver is thrown through their windshield and killed, as well as a random woman laying in the street with her face torn off. While this is all going on, we see Hirsch run back into his office where he alerts Alex of what is happening down in Piccadilly Circus as they both grab their coats and quickly head down there, believing this must be David. So, a quick bit of info about the werewolf scene that we are about to see, where it's like running through the crowd, being chased by the cops. So, the way they accomplished this was Baker built a werewolf suit minus the back end. And he basically had a flat board placed inside of it that kind of stuck out of the back. And they hired a dancer that would have a lot of flexibility and arm strength to play the wolf, where he would get inside the costume using his arms as the werewolf's front legs, with a crew member holding the board up behind him. And as they would both move forward, the back legs were set up where they would kind of just move like on their own as the contraption like traveled in the forward direction. Baker describes it like those wheelbarrow races where you would run with your arms while your partner like kind of held your legs up like a wheelbarrow. So we then cut back to the street where we see the police chasing David throughout the area, where they eventually corner him in a dead-end hallway. Once the backup arrives, they load the rifles and surround the wolf, preparing to fire when suddenly Alex pushes her way through the blockade, rushing down there by herself to see what has happened to her lover. And needless to say, she's pretty shocked at the sight of the werewolf at first, but her love for him overpowers her fear as she then tells him they're going to kill him and pleads for him to let her help. But unfortunately for her, the only response she gets is a horrifying growl. She then pauses for a moment and then says, "I love you, David," which immediately penetrates the werewolf's tough exterior and hits David right in the feels. And this is where David finally kind of gains some control over the beast, realizing he has to die in order for the killing to stop, especially before he hurts Alex. We then get this really cool close-up shot of the werewolf's face as he drops the evil-looking facial expression and suddenly lunges towards Alex, knowing the police will shoot him and finally put an end to this thing. That's actually my favorite shot of the movie, where they're close up on his eyes and his expression totally changes.
Yeah, the eyes are done amazing.
Yeah. David is then shot multiple times and falls to the ground dead as Dr. Hirsch and the police run over to see what this thing looks like. But as they arrive, all they find is Alex standing there in complete shock as she looks at a dead, naked David lying in the street, proving to them both that he was right all along and he was indeed a werewolf. And that is the end of American Werewolf in London. Goddamn, that's a good movie.
Yeah, Alex's acting there at the end, like the "I love you" to the puppet in the
Yeah,
alleyway, like, she's so convincing. God, she did such a great job in this
agree.
movie.
I agree.
I love how the entire Piccadilly Circus, like, mayhem that goes down, like, kills more people than the werewolf kills the
Yeah,
whole
yeah.
movie. Like, it's just, like, just insane people flying out of windows, getting crushed by cars.
It's
Um,
insanity, yeah.
but the way that they made that happen was even more insane. They had what was it, 2.5 minutes? They had two
They under
nights to
5 minutes, yeah.
they had 2 nights to shoot, and they had 2.5 minutes to close down the circle, yell action, everything happen, cut, and clean up so they could open the circus road back up.
Yeah.
And it is insane how they managed to get this thing done in just 2 days.
Yeah, they had to promise the police department that they could do it this fast. And they didn't even they didn't even make the just regular citizens leave. Like, they had a group of people, because they hired a really, really good stunt team, like a huge stunt team that had done stuff like this before. I believe they actually helped do the Blues Brothers, where they drive through the mall. and they brought them in, and this stunt team had it so planned out where they literally had people dressed like they had stuntmen extras dressed that would actually hold the public back while the scene was filmed. So there's a lot of people in the scene that actually wasn't an extra in the movie. They were just there. And basically the police department told them, you guys cleaned that up faster than we have ever been able to clean an accident up because they
Yeah.
crashed all these cars right there.
Yeah.
And it's
Dude,
amazing.
one part of it, and there is a awesome behind the scenes shot inside the double-decker bus, which does a complete, like, 180 slide sideways,
Yeah.
and they literally jacked that thing up and switched its axles out with the same axles and wheels that are on a forklift, so they could it essentially could have sat and done circles if
Yeah.
it wanted to.
Yeah, it was like a contraption that they would push, and it would had, like, these jacks built underneath it, and it would lift the bus up off its regular wheels,
Yeah.
and it became you could just spin it and do anything you wanted, and, like,
Dude,
that was
that's
that stunt team that built that bus.
yeah, the amount of planning and stuff to and they had 1 take to get it right. They had 2 nights to shoot the whole scene. It had to be done in 1 take, and they had, like, 2.5 minutes to yell action, cut, clean everything up, and open it back up to the public, and for them to pull that off is just absolutely insane.
Yeah,
Like, you
agreed.
almost have to have a sales guy director to be able to convince people that that was even possible. To have the type of, confidence to say, "Hey, we will make this happen with enough planning and time, we will make this happen." Think they had, like, 2 weeks or 6 weeks of practice leading up to it, and then whenever they filmed all of the, other scenes with the werewolf and stuff, they only built a portion of a replica
Yeah, the front of
of
the
the
shop.
square, but they only had to build it, like, 2 stories up. 'Cause they weren't gonna shoot anything higher than that, and they had a really good idea. They're like, "How are we going to replicate everything screen accurate from Piccadilly Circus?" And they said, "Well, instead of us trying to replicate Piccadilly Circus, we will decorate Piccadilly Circus when we do our 2-night shoot. We'll do all our set dressing in our own way, and then we'll just take that stuff when we build the replica, and we'll already have it." And they said it was fucking genius idea.
Yeah. Got some quick facts we'll run through really quick. So, Rick Baker apparently plays one of the Nazi werewolves in the nightmare sequence, specifically the one who slashes David's throat. So, Jack picking up the Mickey Mouse figurine and saying in a high pitched voice, "Hi, David," was not scripted, and this was totally made up on the spot by Griffin Dunne, which is little things like that, man. Like, there's so many little things that make this movie good, but that's part of it. A lot of the conversation between Jack and David at the beginning of the movie when they're walking was improvised. Them singing through the
You
moors was all improvised.
you can tell, that's why my first note in this whole entire movie is how good their chemistry was. And you speaking of Rick Baker doing the throat slit, that's another thing, we forgot to even bring up is how awesome the throat slit looks
Yeah.
in the dream sequence. Like, it looks amazing.
So the nightmare with the Nazi werewolves originally confused audiences and led to some walkouts. But in truth, the sequence was inspired by the writer of The Wolfman from 1941, stating that he saw werewolves as metaphors for Nazis, otherwise good men driven to animalistic violence and who know their next victim by the symbol of a star on their body. Another little fun bit of information. So David Naughton and Griffin Dunne actually loved this scene and did not want it removed. So the wolf howl you hear was actually made up of about 9 different sounds, including a wolf, a lion, a panther, a locomotive, and they actually have an elephant in there that's like reversed. So a
Mm.
lot of different stuff to make that howl. I did not get that extensive when I put the howl in our show theme song.
Yeah, that's a lot.
All right, so ratings and kill count. We have a total of 16 kills. We actually have a bonus of 22. So we have Jack Goodman, who gets eaten by the werewolf, the werewolf man who's shot by the villagers. Harry and Judith are both ripped apart in the backyard. Bum 1, 2, and 3 are all mauled to death off screen. Gerald Bringsley was eaten on an escalator in a subway. We have the porno patrons 1 and 2 were killed in the theater, and then you have the porno theater worker was also torn apart by the werewolf. Inspector Villers had his head torn off. The bus passenger was thrown through the window and then ran over. Random car passenger was ejected through the windshield. Random street lady had her face ripped off or possibly ran over. We're not really sure. And number 16 was David, who was shot to death by the cops. And then we have the kills from the dream. If you want to add those or not, it's up to you. You have Mrs. Kessler was shot. Mr. Kessler shot to death by the werewolf Nazis. Mrs. Kessler, the same. David's kid brother and kid sister are both killed by the werewolf Nazis off screen. David had his neck slit by the werewolf Nazi, and then Alex was stabbed to death by the werewolf Nazi.
You know, I gotta say that porno theater had like 5 guys in it, so that means 3 of them had climaxed and got out of there before everything went down.
One of the only times coming fast is a good thing. All right, favorite kill. What you got?
I gotta go with Jack, and now I went with Jack because
Makes
of
sense.
the aftermath of his death. What we get to see in that makeup with his throat ripped out and shit is just some of the best makeup in all this movie. It looks incredible. A second, I didn't count the dream sequence because I really did like David getting his throat slit. But a second would be the head that gets fucking ripped off and thrown across the hood of the car.
Fillers.
Yeah,
okay.
I thought that was awesome.
Yeah. So I went with Jack. It's awesome. It's kind of gruesome. It's kind of sad. And it's a classic kill. Anybody who sees a screen grab of this kill immediately knows what movie it's from. And that doesn't happen with a lot of kills. My second, man, it was a close one. But I ended up going with the theater worker. When the cop shines a light on the werewolf and he's like ripping out this guy's flesh, that was awesome. Shout out to the werewolf Nazi kills. There are some the Nazi kills are like out of left field. They're shocking. So I give a little shout out to them, especially the Alex kill. That still gets me to this day, as many times as I've seen this movie. And all the car crash people, those were all awesome. All good kills.
Yeah, I thought it was the mayhem at the end reminds me of like the end of American Psycho when he just loses it and just starts killing everybody.
Oh, yeah.
But like as if everybody just started killing themselves.
Yeah.
It's just mayhem.
Yep. All right, what'd you rate it?
So I gave this movie a 4.5. I think the special effects are, we've talked about it this whole episode. Rick Baker did an amazing job. I think John Landis absolutely gave him the space and the time and the information for him to work his magic. And that's why I want to add John Landis in there, because without him giving the time to schedule that for like post-production or give them, 6 weeks to work on the transformation scene, we would not have gotten what we actually got. Thought we got some really awesome cinematography setups. We get a really good mix of comedy and horror. You know that I am very, very crude sometimes on the comedy and horror. I think this pulls it off really good. Back to the cinematography, I want to mention too I remember when I was younger, this movie being like lunged in very gloomy, very toned down in the colors, but going back and watching it upscale with the bright colors against the very gloomy backdrop really makes everything pop. And then the acting, man, the acting is top notch. I also think from a storytelling standpoint, it's a very interesting werewolf film in the fact that your main character is essentially fighting the will to live and then the guilt of what he's gonna do. And we get a really interesting character that knows what he's doing's bad and wants to be arrested and wants to be killed. He doesn't wanna be doing bad things. And it could be a very different movie if you got a selfish person in that role.
Kind of an
So
interesting idea too,
yeah,
is to do this with somebody who's like a criminal.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it could be a much, much different movie, but yeah, from a storytelling standpoint, very, very interesting. And then seeing the behind the scenes and all the things that John Landis pulled together to make certain things happen, like that ending we just talked about. I mean, there was so many amazing planning, so much amazing planning that went into this. Yeah, I think it's a great movie.
Yeah, it is. It's so great. I gave it 5 stars. I fucking love this movie. It's super fun. I'm definitely a little more into the comedy mixed in with horror than you are. So I kind of seen these ratings being somewhere along these lines. I think the movie's super fun. It had fantastic effects. It is, in my opinion, the perfect blend of comedy and horror. I also think the actors all have amazing chemistry and all do a really good job, minus, the porno actors, but that's a purpose.
Yeah, they did a good job by not doing a good job.
Exactly. I really enjoyed the story, which is rare when it comes to werewolf movies. I think the addition of his dead friend coming back and trying to convince him he has to die is really what separates this from all the other werewolf movie stories. And that and the effects, those two things is really what makes this a unique werewolf movie. Ginny Augeter is absolutely stunning in this. I never get tired of her scenes throughout the movie. I think it was awesome that it takes place in London and it uses real locations, especially that crazy ass finale. It essentially takes place in Times Square of the UK, which we know that is a really difficult thing to pull off and a really difficult place to be allowed to film in. David, Jack, and Dr. Hirsch are all good characters. Hirsch does a fantastic job as like the moral anchor and almost like a stand-in for the audience. I think that he gets overlooked a lot of times. Huge shout out to Rick Baker for really putting his all into the effects and makeup here. This is hands down some of the best effects work I've ever seen, and I think it should have won way more awards. I think Landis did a great job putting this movie together and bringing on so many good people that made this happen. I honestly don't think there'll ever be a better werewolf movie, but Robert Eggers is working on one right now, so we will see. But yeah, fantastic movie, 5 stars for me.
Yeah, we've gotta jump into the howling. We gotta deep dive those because now that we do the podcast and, we've covered movies that I see one way and completely feel different about it when I see it now and I know more about film, and it's been a while since I've seen that one.
Yeah, I haven't seen that in a long time.
I think that's a little bit darker of a version of a werewolf story. We definitely have to get into that. I did do some quick research on the werewolf stuff, so I guess because remember, we got the Teen Wolf movies that even outside of horror that popped
Yeah.
up in the 80s. And I guess it was the ultra conservative Reagan era and pop culture. And you see it in music. Things started getting very sexual and over sexualized. And it happened with cinema too, with the transformation of turning into a werewolf is very symbolic and a metaphor for the younger generations going through puberty and growing into adults and the growing hormone changes within somebody, which we see that a lot in like Teen Wolf.
Yeah, good
Um,
point.
yeah. So did want to add that a little bit of background research I did during the episode.
All right, well, that is our coverage on American Werewolf in London. Once again, we thank you guys for listening. Please give us a follow or like if you enjoy the show. Check out the website and check out the socials. Tell a friend, a family member, or your hot, horny nurse about the show. And we hope to see you next time.